In this video, we uncover the chilling chain of events behind a drug-fueled robbery that ignited a brutal revenge plot, sending shockwaves through Blackpool's criminal underworld. In the early hours of April 10th, 2023, Daniel Cunningham, a dealer operating out of Tarnbrook Drive, Blackpool, was abruptly awakened by heavy footsteps echoing up the stairs. Unbeknownst to him, 3 masked men, armed with hammers, had forced their way into his home. The trio stormed into the main bedroom, their presence loud and threatening. Using sheer intimidation, they demanded one thing: drugs and money. Caught off guard and vulnerable, Cunningham had no time to fight back. He handed over the goods without resistance. The intruders got what they came for and vanished into the night. Cunningham's wife, who had been with him during the terrifying ordeal, was left shaken. She called the police and reported the break-in. But when officers arrived, they were met with a wall of silence. Daniel Cunningham refused to cooperate, offering no names, no descriptions, nothing. He was sticking to the unspoken rule of the streets: no snitching. But what the robbers didn't realize was that Cunningham had recognized one of them, but chose not to share that information with authorities. Instead, he made a decision to take matters into his own hands. The authorities had now left the scene, hopeless, with little to no information to help track down the perpetrators. Meanwhile, Daniel Cunningham had already picked up the phone, dialing his longtime Merseyside contact to hatch a ruthless scheme to reclaim what was taken. That contact was Lee Clark, a man deeply embedded in organised crime and the very lifeline of Cunningham's operation. Clark supplied vast quantities of Class A drugs, flooding Blackpool streets like an unstoppable tide. Beyond his role as a supplier, he carried a formidable reputation in Liverpool's underworld, one forged by his willingness to wield extreme violence whenever it was required. This guy was without a doubt the perfect man for the job. As Cunningham spoke with Clark, he named John Hutchinson, the very man he'd recognised during the break-in. Hutchinson was no major player, just a small-time operator in Blackpool's drug scene, yet brimming with ambition and a ruthless temper. Known for taxing rival dealers, seizing their product to fuel his own growing operation, he was gambling on a dangerous strategy in an unforgiving underworld. In that world, greed is a double-edged sword, and it was only a matter of time before his own caught up with him. With the target identified, it was now just a matter of pinpointing his whereabouts. For just £200, Daniel Cunningham brought in Darren McCabe, a local addict with a reputation for finding people. Streetwise and always lurking on the fringes, McCabe was also a loyal customer of Cunningham's drug operation, making him a reliable asset in moments like these. Back in Merseyside, Lee Clark wasn't working alone. He enlisted the help of David Bond, a name that carried weight among Liverpool's more dangerous circles. The duo didn't waste a second. On the afternoon of April 10th, 2023, Clark and Bond jumped into a grey Ford Fiesta, later revealed to belong to Clark's partner. They tore through Liverpool's busy streets, heading straight to Blackpool to leave a statement. Darren McCabe, frantic and on the edge, was overheard by a landlady at a local pub muttering in panic. "I need to go after some guy. I have to kill him. I need money." Moments later, McCabe stormed out and made his way to Hutchinson's last known address, only to find his girlfriend at the door. McCabe brandished a knife, waving it threateningly in her direction in a calculated attempt to intimidate her. He issued a grim warning: "The Scousers are coming for Hutchie. He'll be a dead man soon." Terrified, the woman phoned Hutchinson immediately, relaying the threats and McCabe's disturbing behaviour. Now fearing for his life, Hutchinson fled. He took shelter at a friend's house, hoping to lay low and let the storm pass by, but it was already too late. McCabe's relentless search had finally paid off. He tracked Hutchinson to a friend's flat on Scorton Avenue. Hutchie thought he was hidden, safe in disguise, but he crossed a man with a fierce reputation in Blackpool's underworld. A reputation Daniel Cunningham had built over years of calculated moves and hard-earned respect. And now, it was hanging by a thread. In the criminal world, being the victim of a robbery isn't just a loss, it's a public humiliation. It signals weakness, and weakness gets you eaten alive. Cunningham knew the clock was ticking. He had to respond, fast, before word hit the streets and his empire began to crumble. The word finally came through. John Hutchinson's location had been confirmed. Back at Cunningham's house, the trio waited anxiously. The plan was already in motion: break into the flat, recover the stolen goods, and teach Hutchinson a lesson he wouldn't forget. Now, it was only a matter of execution. Still on April 10th, just after 6 p.m, the group made their move, headed straight for Scorton Avenue, with Darren McCabe behind the wheel. The quiet town of Blackpool, known for its seaside charm and vibrant holiday spirit, was about to witness one of the most brutal, drug-fueled attacks it had ever seen. Armed with a metal bar, a wooden pole, and a hammer, the group was captured on surveillance just blocks away from their destination, moving with purpose, focused, and ready to act. Darren McCabe remained behind the wheel, patiently waiting in the getaway car. The others approached the flat. With brutal force, they shattered the door window, making their presence violently clear. Inside, John Hutchinson and a friend were caught off guard, frozen in fear with no time to escape. Hutchinson was dragged to the ground by David Bond, who immediately began a savage assault. Wielding the hammer, Bond struck Hutchinson repeatedly, then stomped on his head with ruthless intensity. Moments later, the other two men joined in, turning the flat into a scene of utter carnage. Under the relentless beating, Hutchinson finally gave up the location of the stash, later estimated to be worth between £21,000 to £40,000. With the goods recovered and Hutchinson left beaten to a pulp, the mission was complete and the message was clear. In Blackpool's underworld, crossing Daniel Cunningham came with a heavy price. A neighbour, alarmed by the chaos, called the police. Officers arrived shortly after 7 p.m. to a grim scene. Hutchinson slumped over the sofa, severely battered. But even in that state, he refused both medical attention and to identify his attackers. With no cooperation and little evidence, authorities had no choice but to leave the scene, unaware that Hutchinson was dying right before their eyes. Internally, he was bleeding out. A ruptured spleen, a fractured rib, and extensive internal injuries from the savage assault had already begun to shut his body down. Then, at 9:10 p.m, police were called to the scene once again, this time joined by paramedics. John Hutchinson had gone into cardiac arrest. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. But it was too late. He succumbed to his injuries shortly after arrival. The mood inside Lancashire Police Headquarters shifted dramatically. What had initially been classified as a violent assault had now escalated to a full-blown murder investigation. Unaware that they had just crossed that fatal line, Daniel Cunningham and his accomplices had already gone their separate ways, celebrating in silence. Later that night, the trio lit up a group chat with jokes and banter about the brutal attack. David Bond texted, "Lads, my foot's killing me." Lee Clark replied, "Took me back to the good old days, that did." Bond responded again, "My bird's fuming. She's all right, just got a cob on. I said I only drove." And finally, Cunningham jumped in to express his gratitude. "Thanks, brother, for everything. You and the other fella, tell him thank you." When news of John Hutchinson's death finally reached the group, the tone shifted and self-preservation quickly took over. David Bond, suddenly gripped by fear, messaged Lee Clark. "What if I did it?" Clark, attempting to reassure him, replied, "A hammer to the back ain't doing that, bro." But in a cruel twist of irony, the autopsy later revealed that a hammer blow to the back was exactly what caused Hutchinson's most fatal injury. With mounting digital evidence, witness statements, including one from Hutchinson's girlfriend, and detailed phone records, the authorities were ready to strike. On April 11th, 2023, at 1:15 p.m., police moved in. Daniel Cunningham was arrested at his home on Tarnbrook Drive, caught mid-conversation on the phone with none other than Lee Clark. News of Cunningham's arrest quickly rippled through the group. In response, David Bond advised Clark in a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. "Launch your phone, bro. Make sure you get rid of the hammer and get all that shit in a fresh JD bag." But by then, the damage was already done. As the investigation intensified, more arrests quickly followed. On April 15th, David Bond was taken into custody at his mother's home in Crosby, Liverpool. Lee Clark was arrested at his residence on Greenall Close, Prescott, and Darren McCabe was found and detained on Talbot Road, Blackpool. With the key players now in custody, interrogations were launched simultaneously. Daniel Cunningham, sticking to the criminal code, offered no comment to every question. Lee Clark admitted to breaking into the flat and assaulting someone he vaguely described as the baldy one, a clear attempt to muddy the waters, as the description didn't match Hutchinson, a weak effort to deflect suspicion. Darren McCabe, perhaps feeling the weight of the consequences, told investigators that David Bond was the one wielding the hammer, though he claimed he didn't actually see the weapon until after they'd fled the scene. Preston Crown Court. The day of reckoning had arrived. The courtroom was tense as the four men behind one of Blackpool's most brutal drug-related killings stood before the jury. Lee Clark and David Bond, the enforcers of the violent revenge plot, were both found guilty of murder. Then, on January 16th, 2024, sentencing was handed down. Clark received life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 27 years, plus an additional 9 years for his role in the drug operation. Bond, also handed a life sentence, was told he'd serve at least 24 years, alongside a 6-month sentence for drug offences. The man who orchestrated it all, Daniel Cunningham, was convicted of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 18 years behind bars, with a 6-year concurrent term and an additional 2 years consecutive for his involvement in the drug trade. And Darren McCabe, the man who hunted Hutchinson through Blackpool's back streets, was also found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. In the end, what began as a robbery spiraled into a brutal act of vengeance, fueled by ego, reputation, and the ruthless code of the streets. 4 men now sit behind bars, and 1 man lies dead. In the criminal underworld, respect is everything. But chasing it can cost you everything.